want to block any little view. It's this nice pole that they give us. There. Strategically put in there. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for letting me come here to talk to you guys today. I'm excited to answer any questions. So if you have any questions at any point in the presentation, please raise your hand and ask the questions. I'm excited to see kind of a lot of great diversity here because we really, really need you guys in STEM. So, and you are completely 100% capable. I've seen some of the stuff that Connie has sent me that you guys have done in your classes, and it's extremely impressive. The fact that you're doing Python coding in middle school. I didn't even do coding at all until I got into high school. I'm just very honored, I guess, to be here with you guys today. So I wanted to give you a little bit of introduction to who I am. I'm actually originally from Houston. I was born in a hospital on Airline Drive, believe it or not. So when I found out that's where the school was, I was like, wow, here I am coming home to some degree. So my origin story, I'm originally from Spring, Texas. So to be an aerospace engineer, you can, at a minimum, get 4 years and a bachelor's degree. So I actually went to a school in the middle of Arizona called Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. There's also one, I guess, in Florida, too, if you look it up. And I did my 4-year degree there. But I also did internships down at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, as well as at Edwards Air Force Base. There's another NASA center. Now it's called Armstrong, named after kind of Neil Armstrong, where they do flight research. So I did internships there. I got a master's degree at AFIT, which is up here in Ohio at Wright-Patterson, which is kind of where I live now. And then I got my PhD down at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a really great experience. And I was actually fortunate because I went to Embry-Riddle, kind of a combination of what my parents had saved for me for college and student loans and scholarships. But one of the great things about a STEM degree is that if you want to get a master's degree or a PhD, you shouldn't have to pay for it at all. There's graduate research assistantships that'll pay for it, so you can do research while you're doing school and they'll pay for it. Or you can also do teaching assistantships where you're going to teach. And so for me, I actually was fortunate that the Air Force paid for my tuition for my master's degree and my PhD. So it's definitely something that's attainable and achievable. The hard part is, just making sure you get the scholarships to figure out how to get through that bachelor's degree. So as far as work experience, I did the NASA Johnson Space Center. These are pictures here from when I was at what was called then the Dryden Flight Research Center, and then it got renamed after Neil Armstrong after he passed away. But what I did there is I actually worked in research simulators, and so we had, for the different aircraft that were there, we had cockpits that were simulators with kind of screens like this that you could see, and here's me kind of in one of the cockpits. And part of my job was to build new components inside that matched what was in the airplane, as well as to kind of bring in new types of control systems. So you guys have noticed probably cars are getting more advanced. There's more features on them. My rental car that I have for this trip has like lane assist and it tells me when there's other cars and stuff around. So we were just starting to develop a lot of those technologies for airplanes back in 2009. And so what we would do is we put it in the simulator and get feedback from the pilots on the types of information they had in the cockpit. Then I went to Ohio and worked at Wright-Patterson. So this was, again, a lot more automation kind of research. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen aerial refueling, where essentially there's a big aircraft that kind of almost looks like an airplane that you might get on at just the airport to go fly across the country, but instead it's a giant fuel tank. It's full of fuel, and other airplanes, small airplanes like F-16 fighters and stuff will come up to it and they'll get fuel. And we were looking at how could we actually automate that so that essentially we don't need as many people in the loop, and we could have UAVs come up and get refueled. So UAVs are unmanned aerial vehicles, kind of flying robots. That's what you could think of. But I also worked on automatic collision avoidance. So we wanted to make sure that we could protect the pilots from accidental collisions with the ground and other aircraft. So the Air Force actually had a problem where we had more pilots that were we were losing due to ground collisions than we were due to battle. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that sometimes they would experience something called gravity-induced loss of consciousness. So I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but when you're in an airplane, you can pull kind of a lot of G's. If you've ever been on a roller coaster, you feel that force down, the number of times gravity force on you. And aircraft, sometimes pilots will get up to like 8 or 9 G's. And what happens is all the blood starts to drain out of their head. And their vision kind of goes black and white, and then it comes into a pinpoint, and then they actually pass out. And so that was one of the biggest problems we had. But it's also, there was other challenges, like there's so many things they're trying to do in the cockpit besides just fly the plane. It's kind of like, now you don't want people texting while driving because you're getting distracted. There's too many things going on. And we're asking the pilots to do too many things. And so that was another reason. Or maybe they're flying at night and they don't know that line is it's kind of a false horizon. They don't realize there's a mountain nearby. So they lose situational awareness. So for a variety of reasons, we actually wanted to have a system that will detect when the aircraft's about to collide with the ground, take control from the pilot, maneuver it away, and then give control back. So that was one of the programs I was very fortunate to work on when I first got out of my undergrad, my 4-year bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. And this goes to 2014. So 2014, we put the ground collision avoidance on the F-16 fleet for the Air Force. And since then, it has saved 10 aircraft and 11 pilots that are now here that wouldn't have been. So the types of work that you could do in STEM really do make a huge difference in people's lives. And that's what really kind of draws me to it, is like the technology is cool, but what you can do with the technology, the difference that you can make is pretty exciting. So after that, I kind of did a lot of research in how do we do almost mathematical proofs that the software is safe, that we're going to put on aircraft. So I don't know if you guys have seen like the Pythagorean theorem, where a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Right now we're in a situation with software where instead of having something like that, we're trying to measure every right triangle and figure out like, okay, does this right triangle fit this rule? Does this right triangle fit this rule? But if we know that all right triangles fit that rule, then we have a proof and we can kind of move forward with it. So we're trying to develop a lot of those kinds of proofs for the aircraft software. So my research. And then now I'm part of a group that does AI research. And I've heard you guys do some Python coding in here. So believe it or not, we actually do mostly Python coding. So I could potentially even hire you as an intern or something, right now. So we do a lot of Python coding to do AI research. And my role is trying to figure out how do we make sure it's safe, especially if we're going to put it on an aircraft or a spacecraft. So a little bit of pictures along the way. So these are pictures of me when I was in my internship here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. So I was actually working in the same building as mission control, which is pretty cool. I got a chance to go visit when they were doing practice for what was the space shuttle back then. So it's been a while now. But they had a space shuttle mission that was going to go up to the International Space Station, and the astronauts were in the simulator practicing for it, and I got to kind of sit in on that. And then I also got to go see, you can kind of see behind me here, this is the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. There's this giant pool that they have all these spacecraft mock-ups, so like fake simulator spacecraft down there. And the astronauts put on their suits and they can kind of practice what it's like to go spacewalk. And they can balance out the air in their suits so it feels like they're floating underwater, which is pretty cool. So I got to just see that while I was there as well. In my research is I was actually doing a bunch of 3D modeling of different components on the International Space Station during that internship. So like different components that they had in building those 3D models. So this was out in the Mojave Desert in California. This is my second internship. And this building behind me is actually really cool too. This is the building that I worked in. It was called the Research Aircraft Integration Facility. And in the middle is where all the offices were, and it goes kind of all the way back. And on both sides, there's hangars full of aircraft. And so what we could do there is something called hardware in the loop simulation. So this is where we actually have a computer that's simulating the aircraft flying, and we could connect it to the actual aircraft. And so what was pretty cool about that is we could have that cockpit simulator that I showed you earlier, and I think I have it again, like here, is that we can connect it to the other aircraft. So we have the guy in the cockpit flying it, but then we can actually see all the parts of the airplane start to move. So it's not flying, but it's moving. It's just like it's being controlled by the pilot that's in the simulator, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we had all the simulators in the middle, and then these on the side had the actual real airplanes in the hangars. And then the airplanes would actually go out and fly too. So we were able to test to make sure it did exactly what we expected it to before we did that. And then here's another F-16 cockpit. They had actual F-16s and F-15s, all kinds of cool modified airplane out there to do research on. So that's another picture in the cockpit. While I was there, I also went to visit the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a pretty cool facility as well for you guys. They do a ton of missions that all are kind of planetary exploration missions. So all of the Mars missions have been there through them. At the time, they were building the Curiosity rover that then launched in 2012. And now we have the Perseverance rover is the one that launched last year. I guess it was in 2020, but it launched. I think it landed last year in the spring. But yeah, they actually build the rovers and spacecraft assembly stuff at JPL, which is pretty cool. And then while I was in the Mojave Desert, the space shuttle sometimes would land. Usually they would try to land in Florida if they could, but if the weather was really bad in Florida, or for whatever reason they couldn't land it there, one of the original landing points was actually out in the Mojave Desert in California, where they would, there's this massive dry lake bed. It almost kind of looks like the bottom of salt flats. If you ever kind of see like those pictures where the land is all cracked and it's completely flat and all, it kind of so dry, it's all cracked. It's kind of what it looks like out there. And you can kind of see here, it's just flat desert out behind it. But what happens is it lands there, but then they have to get it back to Florida. They did have to get it back to Florida. And so what they did is they actually lifted it up with cranes and they put it on top of a 747 airplane. And then they flew it all the way back. A lot of times they would stop here in Houston at Ellington Airfield, which is just north of the Johnson Space Center. And that was kind of that. So what's interesting about this is it's a regular 747, but they took all the guts out. So this is what the inside looks like. They wanted to make it as light as possible. So there was no chairs or anything inside of it except for in the very top up here, there's some chairs, but everything else was completely empty. So it would look like on the inside to make it as light as possible so it could carry this big space shuttle. And then one of the funny things that I didn't know until I saw it in person is that there's actually, it's kind of behind my head here, there's a little sign on there on top of the 747 that says "Place shuttle here, black side down," which I thought was kind of funny because it's just kind of ridiculous. And that's me in the cockpit. Just want to take a photo op. So one of the cool things too, I want to talk about for this one, this is all about travel as a researcher. So now what I do is research for the Air Force. And so we're trying to come up with new ways to do automation, new software that we're going to put on airplanes to make them more capable. And one of the really cool things about that is I get to constantly travel and present what we're doing on research and collaborate with other people. So I'm actually here right now in Houston because I'm visiting with Texas A&M University and University of Houston. I'm talking to other professors there about the research that they're doing and kind of seeing how can we collaborate and work together to develop technologies that can help the Air Force and the Space Force. That's the other cool. This is one of the coolest trips that I've been to. It's also one of the scariest presentations I've ever given. So I got to go to Izmir, Turkey, to give a presentation to a NATO conference, which is the North Atlantic Trade Organization, on the ground collision avoidance system that we were working on. And it was a room full of 200 people. There were only 2 women. I was one of them in the room. And it was just completely terrifying. Probably there's been like 3 nights in my life where I couldn't sleep the night before before something, and this was one of them because it was like I'd never been to a conference that big with that many people in it. So this was back in 2012. So it's kind of an idea. So this is while we were in Izmir, we went out to Ephesus. So I don't know if anybody kind of has like a Christian background where Paul spoke to the Ephesians. Like that's where he went and spoke to them. But it's this really cool ruin of a Roman city. And I never would have been able to go see that necessarily without being able to go there kind of on this work trip. But I've also gotten to go to Brussels, Belgium, because that's where Eurocontrol is, which is kind of like the group that does all of the air traffic control for Europe. And so we were meeting with them to talk about how to avoid collisions, especially if we want to put more unmanned aircraft into the national airspace or the European airspace for them, which is more international. But I also got to go to Sweden, so I got to go to Saab Aerospace and talk to them about collision avoidance technologies, which was pretty cool for work. And I've had some other opportunities as well, like a lot of U.S. travel, coming to Dallas for stuff or going to conferences across the country. So lots of cool opportunities to travel as part of my job that most people don't really necessarily think about. But there's more to life than work. So this is why I think trying to recognize. I think there's this one challenge that we have in STEM is that, has anybody seen The Big Bang Theory? Yeah, raise your hand. So like people tend to think that to be a nerd, you have to be like Sheldon Cooper. Like that has to be everything that you are. And that's not true, So there's lots of engineers that are much more than just focused on engineering all the time. And so what I wanted to do with highlighting this is talk about the other types of things that I like to do. So one of the things that I like to do is I paint. So these are a couple of my paintings that I do as a hobby, which is not like engineering at all, but kind of gets to work the other side of my brain. I also love running, so I had to do this race. It was in Huntsville, Alabama. It's the Rocket City Marathon. I was like, I'm an aerospace engineer. I have to do the Rocket City Marathon. I also have like Instagram pages where I do a lot of art around STEM that are pretty cool. And then I also like to travel and do photography. So this was a hiking trip that I took with some of my friends to Peru to see Machu Picchu. So this is kind of just really trying to emphasize that there's a lot more to a person, and a person who does STEM can be more than just a Sheldon Cooper kind of personality. I think that's all I kind of had for a presentation. So at this point, I wanted to open it up to questions. I do also do some work on the spacecraft side, but I don't really have any cool pictures necessarily of that. Some of the research that I'm doing right now is trying to teach spacecraft how to dock by having it simulate over and over again in, believe it or not, Python code, where we basically have do thousands of simulations and try to learn over time by giving it a kind of a video game with rewards that it can slowly learn over time by getting a higher score and trying different things how to do that. So, but yeah, at this point, I just want to make sure I have plenty of time for questions. I'm very excited to see kind of what you guys want to know about and learn about. Any thoughts you have?
I have one.
Okay.
So you're talking about the space shuttle one.
Okay.
I'm trying to learn. Is that Python and AI, since you said it's learning what it's doing?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the space shuttle. We actually have satellites that we're simulating or docking, but it is Python plus AI. So once you learn Python, one of the cool things that's out there is there's a bunch of other people who love to write code in Python, and what they do is they publish their code to the internet. It's called open source codes. I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah. And so there's a couple of open source packages out there that you can use in Python. There's TensorFlow and PyTorch that help you to actually do this reinforcement learning training for AI. So the reinforcement learning is kind of what I was talking about before. It's kind of like training your dog, where if it does something good, you give it a treat. But if it does something bad, maybe you say, don't go to the bathroom on the carpet, and it knows, and it's got its tail between its legs, and it's like, I'm sorry, So it's kind of we do the same thing, but instead of giving them, like yelling at them, or we write a score in there. So we can use tools like PyTorch and TensorFlow to do that training process and to monitor how it goes. So we can see charts as it's learning how good it's getting a better score over time. Yes?
What got you to like coding?
What got me to like what?
Coding.
Coding?
What made you like it?
Oh, coding. Okay.
Coding.
Yep, sorry. So I think for me, I was always more attracted to the software side. I think I kind of liked the logic of it, and to see how much you could do with software and the impact that you can have. Like for me, I think the technology was always interesting, but it's always almost to me like, what can you do with it? So the fact that I could use it for me to command a spacecraft to do something like docking or to land on a planet. So I was motivated to learn how to do it based on that, if that makes sense. But I was also lucky, like you guys, to have an opportunity during high school, really. So you guys are like ahead of the game, having it in middle school to learn some coding. So I did, I think, Java, and I had a robotics class in high school, and I really enjoyed both of those. And then once you get to college, you end up using a lot more code as well if you do any kind of engineering or science. But yeah, that's a great question. Yes?
Is making AI easy or way harder?
Making AI is actually pretty hard because you think artificial intelligence is really smart, but it's not. So the types of, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with neural networks, but it's this idea that we're trying to create a mathematical model that operates similar to the human brain, where it's got these synapses that fire to build kind of memory. But what's interesting is they're a lot smaller than the human brain, like thousands of times smaller than the human brain is the type of stuff what we're looking at for neural networks. And one of the problems is it's so hard to figure out how to write the reward system. Like, how do you give it a high score? So for instance, when we're trying to train a spacecraft to dock, we say it's successful when it kind of gets close enough in the right region. But as we're kind of doing these simulations over and over, we kind of want to stop it. We don't want to just explore and randomly fly around forever, because then we're spending a lot of time running our computer so that it does that. So we have different conditions to make it stop. So it does all these simulations over and over again. And if it's successful, it stops and then it restarts and does it again. But it can also stop if it runs out of time. So if it's just going for way too long, or it runs out of fuel, or that it also can stop if it goes too far away. And so at first, when we wrote the scoring for it, we were giving it a penalty for how long it took to get there. So every second that it took to try to get there, we were giving it a penalty. And so what ended up happening is this artificial intelligence that's not very smart said, well, I can get a high score if I just fly away as fast as possible, because then I don't get all these negative points for every time step that I'm in here. So you end up having all these things you didn't expect. Or we had another model of an aircraft, and we didn't realize that in the model, if it flew high enough, the model that we had said that there was no air there, and so it didn't have any drag to slow it down. And so we just said, well, I'm just going to fly up as high as I can, and we couldn't figure out why is the AI having this weird behavior. It was because our model was not correct. And so it's kind of this, it's hard to kind of debug and figure out what it is, but it's also fun to do that because it's kind of this problem solving as you're going through and trying to debug, why would it be doing that? How do we fix it or go about it? So yeah, I would say it's definitely hard. There's a lot of tools out there that make it easier for you, and there's more people out there who've done it. So one of the things we can do too is look at papers that people have written about what they've done before and use that as a starting point to try to figure out how we would apply it to what we care about. So they may have applied it to a car and we want to apply it to an aircraft. So we have at least somewhere to start, but yeah, it definitely can be hard.
So when you're doing that, let me back. Some of what we've done with AI, it's just been machine learning with photos.
Okay, yeah.
So when you're working on the program you're doing in Python, the parameters are setting. Is it identifying what the documentation looks like, so it would be by photo, and is it also identifying by maybe, do you have to type in the parameters, like it should be at this particular XY location or something like you would with the map? I'm trying to visualize it in my head too.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's a whole other group that's working on the kind of the sensor part, the visual part. So we're assuming that we know exactly where we are and exactly where the other spacecraft is. So we have the X, Y, Z coordinates of where it is, and we assume it's not moving. And so we're just trying to move ourselves relative to that to get to the right position. So it's called like full state feedback. So we know we have all the information that we want. But there are a lot of cases where you do like partial observability where you only know some things about the situation. You're trying to figure that out. But it sounds like you guys are doing like a supervised learning where you have labeled pictures that you're sending through to train the data.
What we were doing. And now we're just doing just Python coding. But when we were doing the AI, it was either you were uploading photos and then you'd run a test. So you'd have all your data, or we were doing video. So you would actually take the video photo for the photos with the camera and then run a test. So it was whether learning on your test photos, were they matching the data?
Yes. Yeah, and so that's another kind. So the type of learning I talked about was called reinforcement learning, where it's like learning to take actions. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, based on X, Y, Z, what do we do? like based on what we know about XYZ. So what you're talking about is like supervised learning, where you have labeled pictures and you're trying to, or video or handwriting or whatever you're trying to categorize. You put it through, you have a training set that goes through, and that trains all the neural network of, and it kind of also has like a pot that gives it rewards for getting it right and wrong over a bunch of pictures. It slowly learns, okay, these are all the pictures of cats, these are pictures of dogs, and you put them in, and then you can test it, so you have a new set of data. So you don't want to necessarily test it the same data it was trained with. You throw a picture of a cat or a dog in, and it'll tell you, here's a cat or here's a dog. There's also unsupervised learning, where you just throw a bunch of pictures in there and you don't tell them what they are. But it kind of like puts all of these pictures in a group over here, and it categorizes these other pictures in a group, and it categorizes these pictures in a group. And you click on it, it's like, oh, these are all pictures of dogs, and these are all pictures of cats, and these are all pictures of hamsters. So it kind of, it'll figure that out, and that's a different type of learning as well.
That sounds cool. We didn't have access to anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
So it kind of just categorizes it, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's one of the big things that you would do with like unsupervised learning, is trying to find categories. And it might be things like, you want to find out what kind of music people like, and you just throw all the music in there and you find, oh, people who tend to like this music also tend to like this music, or movies, recommendations for movies or something. People who like this kind of movie also like these movies. So yeah, I try to categorize.
kind of like the algorithm Netflix and YouTube and all them use.
Yes, exactly. So they have like tons of data from millions of people who are using it. They get to put into the algorithm to train it. Come up with kind of models of people, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, these are great questions. So what got you guys to take this class? I'm kind of curious. It's probably one of your lectures. What made you?
Teacher.
Yes. You're an awesome teacher. So I'm kind of curious, what get you guys excited about STEM?
It looked very interesting to me.
It was very interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I always wanted to be a part of making a games, so that's what I'm trying to STEM.
Oh yeah, definitely, like making video games. When I worked in the simulator facility, that's kind of what my job was to almost build video games that pilots would come in and fly and give us feedback on them. So that's definitely a great reason to get into STEM. Yes.
I also just wanted to make my video games. I love playing them, and I just wanted to build my own at this point.
Yeah,
I decided to give it a shot.
that would be pretty cool. Have you got a chance to do anything like video games in this class? Yeah?
Both of us actually make games for it.
Oh, nice.
I had them in 6th grade, so now as 8th graders, they have Mr. Shipoletsky in the middle of computer science.
I had it for 6th grade as well.
That's awesome. Like I'm kind of like, part of me is like, wow, I wish I had this when I was in middle school.
I know Jasmine's really lucky because now I teach at Scratch with the 6th graders, and she's created a video game. She originally created the design in Google Slides, and then actually created the game in Scratch. And so you get to choose the player, collect stuff, and you can win and lose. It's
Yeah, and I think one other thing too, when it comes to machine learning, and a reason why we need everybody to be involved is that we need everybody's kind of opinions on what makes ethical AI, that makes good decisions, and then if you just let one group of people decide what that is, then we're not going to get as a society the type of AI that we need. So
Do you find in Turkey, am I wrong? I mean, I'm thinking America's right up there with the computer science. I mean, are you finding other countries are as comparable with us, better than us?
Well, I think it depends, interestingly enough. So most of Europe, I think, is probably relatively comparable in terms of some of the computer science research and stuff that's coming out of there. What's interesting is that the way that they do college in Europe is that most of them, they don't have grades for homework or projects. They only get grades on tests, and they have a lot of emphasis on a lot more emphasis on math than we do. So they the tests that they have even to graduate high school for math are pretty intense, and they're very theoretical, versus where we in the United States tend to be more practical. We want to go build something, and we just need to know enough to go build or make whatever we want to go build. whereas they kind of have this deeper theory of math that they kind of the way that they teach it. Which when it comes to doing things like making proofs like the Pythagorean theorem about software, they're kind of better at that type of thing in Europe than we are. But in terms of machine learning, it's definitely, there's a lot of leadership in the United States in that, just because companies like Google and Facebook, and they can monetize it, they can make money from that machine learning. So there's a huge business in it from that perspective. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of good competition, and a lot of the conferences that we have, there's a lot of international people coming in, from Germany, from France especially, have a lot of people kind of interested in this.
Are you finding that our universities that like you're visiting today, are they pumping out good product that can really?
Yeah, they definitely are. I was very impressed. I was at Texas A&M, and I got to meet with a lot of the students there, and so there's the people who are doing their bachelor's degree, and then the master's and PhD students, which are kind of graduate students. And they are doing really great work right now. And one of the people I talked to, the professor, he actually found a new theory in math that kind of helps us to prove more properties. So so there's a lot of really great work in American universities on
That's
this
local.
technology.
That's local.
Yep.
So you guys don't suck
So,
on math.
don't-
Yeah.
I don't know, I think they're all.
Although I will say I got a lot of B's in math, and so
What's that?
you don't have to be perfect, but
You don't need to be-
yeah.
You don't have to be an A student.
yeah. So, but mostly A's, but I did get some B's in math, and for me, I think it's more about being passionate and excited about what you're doing and working really hard to achieve those goals, and you can definitely do it. Don't necessarily think, I'm not good enough for this. I can't figure it out. I got to be in math. I'm never going to be good at coding. One of the beautiful things when you are working is that there are so many different ways to test that what you built is correct. Whereas, like, if you're taking a math test, you have whatever your class period is, take that test, and you don't have as much time to go back and double check everything. But when you're doing it for work, you have a lot of time to go back and double check and have other people help double check it to make sure that it's correct, which is great. You're checking each other. So that's another part of my job, is that I actually review papers that people write and review their math. I try to see if there's any mistakes in it, and then I give them the feedback. So we're all kind of checking each other. It's a peer review process.
One more question, because we got a lunch and golf from there soon.
Okay.
So I always talk to the students about when they are coding, to working groups at times, or at least have a partner. So when you're working on a team and everybody's reviewing, what's in just a very general number, how many people coding or working on a team would you possibly have?
So right now, my team has 5 people on it. So usually everybody has their own project that they're doing, but we definitely can all reach out and say, hey, I'm stuck on this part. Anybody have any feedback? So it's very collaborative, that everybody wants to work together to achieve the same kind of goal and get the software to work.
Do you have that when you do that? Do you have like one person who's typing code? I mean, it's like how. I mean, it's like like the thought process of like, I want to add this in. Let's do that. I mean, how do you get cohesiveness then?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we do have so GitHub, I think, provides this, but Git is kind of version control. And so each person will work on their code, and then they send a merge request. So they say, here's my code. I want to request that it gets merged. And there's another person who goes through and they see all the changes that you made, and they approve or reject each one that goes into the larger code base.
So that's what you do. I've heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get lost on there, but it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is kind of fascinating, yes.
I just want to do like kind of like a question of what's your thought on STEMFest?
On what?
On STEMFest.
STEMFest?
They have STEMFest. We have STEMFest.
Okay. So is it like a science fair, or what is? Yeah.
It's going to be more.
It's
on
a
the technology.
combination of things.
Okay.
The computer science teachers and even librarians are involved in it with makerspace and STEM ideas, because there's 83 schools in the district, and we all come together to showcase projects that the kids have done, and we also do some learning activities. So we do some, we call it the different
Some different sessions.
Yes, some of the coding is like online, and then we have offline type of coding things. Like I do offline things with looms, weaving, and things like that. So it's a big deal.
Okay.
There's a competition and everything.
Yeah, I had, I think, like very similar kind of science fair experiments. I also did some biotech competitions and other kind of competitions, math competitions when I was in school. And I think that's really great, and especially if you have a chance to explain what you're doing to someone else is one of the hardest things I feel like in science is you get into this and you almost have this model, you know how it works in your head, but trying to explain to somebody else how it works is really hard, but it's extremely important because you have to work in these large teams with people that have different backgrounds. So like I work with psychologists that help me to figure out how do I build the system so that humans can use it and it makes sense to them, and then they can trust the automation. Or we'll work with biologists on different projects and stuff. And so being able to explain to different people how the system works. And if you work on something that's going to be interfacing with the public, stuff like, a video game, you need to make sure that whoever's going to play the video game understands how it works and whatnot too. So, getting exposure to a lot of different types of science is really good, as well as anytime you can have a chance to explain what you're working on is really good experience. And sometimes when you're afraid to explain it, like still go do it because, if you make mistakes when you're doing the explanation, you're going to learn from it. And each time you do it, you'll do better. So that presentation I gave to 200 people, I may not have done it completely perfectly, but I learned from it. And now every time I go do presentations, I'm a little bit better each time. And so that's one thing that I've learned is that people are not fixed. We all have the opportunity to grow in whatever we're really passionate in. And so you can continue to grow and overcome a lot of challenges. Yes.
So you said something about the simulator thing?
Mhm.
Does it actually move?
So we do have one motion simulator that I got to work on. There's one at NASA Ames, and I don't know if we have to leave at any point in time, but you can stop me when you need. Okay. Yeah. There's one at NASA, the one I'm on in Ohio. It's actually kind of this large ball on this arm, and so we can actually do up and down motion and side to side, and then it also rotates. And it's all hydraulics, and so it's trying to also make sure one of the hardest parts of that is if you put a person in it, making sure that the visual that they see matches what they feel and what their inner ear, all the fluids in their ear think is happening, because otherwise people will throw up like almost instantly. You have to clean up the simulator, which is not fun. So yeah, I'm sorry.
How many times have people threw it up?
It's pretty rare because we do a lot of testing before we put a person in there. But I think it's definitely happened. So you got to make sure that whatever they're seeing matches it. So some things like say you're feeling G's, maybe you turn the aircraft up, or you turn the ball up so that they're laying more on their back, and then it feels like they have acceleration even though they're not accelerating forward. Or you kind of turn to the side and it makes them feel like they're kind of being pushed to the side one way, but just on the way that gravity is kind of pulling on them. But yeah, that's a great question in terms of the motion simulators. So yeah, there's a lot of testing that goes into that before we put people in. And then, we also make sure, because over time, all the equipment ages. So like accelerometers and sensors and stuff that are on there, we have to go replace them and then make sure it still matches the model.
What is your hashtag?
So my hashtag is Art of Rocket. Well, I don't know if I have one on Twitter actually, but I think the AFRL's is AF Research Lab. Yep.
Can we get a picture of everybody?
I would love that. And I don't know.
Yeah, let's do that.
I don't know if I'm allowed to have a picture too. If you guys can send one to me.
Okay. I already told